Let her wear my name, Adana said into the phone, keeping her voice low so the generator outside Brightway Travels would swallow the worst of it. By the time immigration finishes with her, Odokapu will know what it means to envy another woman's road. She had already deleted the email carrying Chisom's genuine visa appointment, and the blue photocopy of her own passport lay beside the keyboard like bait. One borrowed identity could close an airport gate, invite police questions, and stain a family compound so badly that even children would speak of it with their game still in their mouths. Adana knew that. She also knew a sponsor abroad had once paid money into her account under that same name, and that name was already waiting inside a system Chisom had never seen. She pressed send on the forged travel form, swallowed once, and refused to think about childhood afternoons under the udala tree. But what Adana did not know was, and before this road turns properly, tell me where you are watching from tonight. If you have ever seen trust used like a trap, or watched one bad signature threaten the name of an entire household, then sit close for this one. Some streets protect you only while your name is clean, and some wounds begin with somebody saying, "Just do this small thing." Leave your city or country in the comments so Chisom's journey can meet you where you are, and listen carefully to how a borrowed face nearly buried a woman who had spent most of her life protecting other people's. In Odokapu, Onitsha, where Ochanja Market emptied its noise into narrow lanes and the Niger sat beyond the roofs like a patient witness, a person's name fed almost as many mouths as money did. Under the wide udala tree near the Nwoke compound, women leaving before dawn traded ututu oma, good morning, with baskets balanced on their heads. And the greeting mattered because the same tongue that welcomed you before sunrise could scatter your name by noon. Chisom lived in a room and parlor at the back of that compound with her mother and her younger brother Somto. Before daybreak, she filled the clay water pot in the shared courtyard, set the enamel cup upside down on its rim, and wiped the mud ring beneath it with the edge of her wrapper, so the first person coming to drink would not step in yesterday's dust. Nobody had asked her to do that. It had simply become one of those small things that held a place together. And when one morning the pot stood dry because she had spent the night at the clinic with her mother, 3 women knocked on her door before 6 to ask if she was unwell. She worked at a small private clinic off Newmarket Road, the sort of place where babies cried into hot afternoons and men came in with cut palms from loading buses. By evening, after the shutters dropped halfway, she often stayed behind to wash the metal trays properly because the younger attendant left soap streaks on them. Then she would stop at Mama Ijeoma's room in the compound to read the names on medicine packets and show the old woman which tablet belonged to morning and which to night. Chisom never did it loudly. She sat on the low stool, held each sachet near the bowl, and spoke as if the words were being placed into a calabash. Because of that, people used her in ways that had nothing to do with money. The bread seller sent her son to ask Chisom to keep a bunch of keys whenever she traveled to Nui. A tailor on the next street trusted her with cloth measurements written on torn cigarette cartons. When quarrels started over borehole turns, someone always said, "Wait until Chisom comes back from the clinic." She would listen with her hands clasped in front of her, then point to the obvious thing everyone else had stepped around, and the matter would settle. The opportunity to travel came through St. Mulumba Parish after one of the catechists mentioned that a care home in Birmingham needed trainees and was willing to process 2 people with clinic experience. There were interviews in Enugu, document checks, references, sleepless nights, and fees that sounded small only to people who did not count their money by the notes that remained after transport. Chisom carried her file in a transparent folder wrapped inside a nylon bag whenever rain threatened. When the acceptance message finally came, her mother sat down on the wooden bed frame and pressed her chest, not speaking for a long time. Somto ran to the compound tap and shouted the news before anyone had told him not to. Adana had grown up 2 doors away. They had fetched water together as girls, shared mirrors before church, and once split a meat pie into such exact halves that the bread seller laughed and said they were measuring the future itself. But adulthood gave the two women different kinds of hunger. Adana worked front desk at Brightway Travels, where posters of smiling passengers covered the wall, and every second customer wanted a shortcut. She dressed sharply, spoke quickly, and knew how to make a room turn in her direction without raising her voice. She had tried twice to leave Nigeria herself. First for a textile buying scheme in Turkey that collapsed, then through a cousin's promised route to Cyprus that swallowed money and returned only shame. Creditors no longer called politely. Her father's transport business had broken under repair costs and hospital bills, and there were mornings when she left the house without breakfast so her younger sisters could eat. When the church welfare committee prayed over Chisom's documents after Mass, Adana stood in the courtyard clapping with everyone else. Only once did her smile slip. It happened when Chisom's mother, still tying her headscarf, said, "May every clean hand receive clean reward." The words were simple. Adana's jaw tightened around them. A week later, Chisom's mother's bleeding returned. It had been troubling her quietly for months, but now it came with a weakness that made her sit down halfway through sweeping. The clinic doctor wrote notes in a hurried hand and spoke of fibroids, tests, and the kind of operation that asks poor people questions before it agrees to help them. Money that had been put aside for travel photographs, transport, and document certification began to shift direction. Chisom sold 2 lengths of Ankara cloth she had been saving. Samto stopped asking about new sandals. The transparent folder remained on the table, its corners beginning to curl. That was when Adana became useful. She called Chisom to Brightway Travels after work and shut the glass door behind them. The office smelled of toner and hot wiring. A standing fan pushed warm air against a row of plastic chairs. On the screen in front of her, several tabs were open. She clicked through them with fast, practiced impatience of somebody who understood both computers and panic. "There is a problem with your travel profile," she said. "Your acceptance is real, but there is a timing issue with your passport update. If you miss the final processing slot, they will move to the next person. You know these people do not wait." Chisom leaned forward, one hand still damp from the clinic sink. "What timing issue?" Adana turned the monitor a little, not enough for the whole screen to show. "The correction on your surname is not reflecting quickly enough, but there is a way to hold the slot. Temporary. Once you land, the employer fixes it. These people care about arrival first." Chisom's shoulders drew in. "Temporary with what?" "With my profile for movement only," Adana said, as if she were offering a wrapper for rain. "You and I are close in age, similar build. The agency abroad only needs the seat filled on time. You will regularize later. It happens more than you think."
For a few seconds, Chisom did not answer. Her fingers rested on the edge of the desk so lightly as if she was afraid the wood might accuse her. Then she said very quietly, "If Blessing must enter this house wearing another woman's name, let it pass our door." Adana gave a short laugh, but her eyes did not laugh with her. That is the speech of someone whose mother is not due for another scan this Friday. The words struck exactly where they were aimed. Chisom looked down. On the desk, a paperclip had been bent and straightened so many times it had gone soft. Adana leaned back, lowered her voice, and softened it. "Listen to me. I am not asking you to steal. I am helping you cross the delay. You think the people traveling clean are always traveling clean? The world outside this compound does not clap for purity, Chisom. It opens for timing." She printed a page, slid it over, and covered the lower half with her palm. "Take this home. Think. If you say no, fine. But if the sponsor replaces you, do not later ask whether a closed door could have been pushed with one finger." That night, Chisom sat on the bed beside her mother and watched the woman sort hospital receipts into a tin biscuit box that once held sewing needles. Nobody in the room mentioned Adana's proposal. Nobody needed to. The air itself had begun carrying it. Before sleeping, Chisom checked her phone again for the embassy message Adana had mentioned. Nothing came. What she did not know yet was that it had already arrived, already been opened, and already been erased by the one person calling herself a friend. The first damage was not loud. That was what made it dangerous. Adana began by helping too much. She accompanied Chisom to a photo studio on Aqua Road and insisted on choosing the picture. She told the photographer to retake it because Chisom's face looked too stubborn. She brought a different wig for her to wear and said it would make the resemblance closer if anybody compared old ID images too quickly. Chisom stood before the camera with her mouth set in a straight line, while the flash kept opening and shutting over her face like judgment. At the clinic, calls started coming from numbers Chisom did not know. A man with a smooth voice asked whether she had arranged the balance payment. Another wanted confirmation that Adana was ready for departure. She corrected him once, then twice, and by the third call, she only gripped the phone until the plastic warmed in her hand. When she asked Adana why strangers were calling her by another name, Adana shrugged. "It is the processing team. Do that start acting village over every small confusion." The matter might still have remained between the two of them if not for the market. Markets in Onitsha do not merely sell goods, they test the strength of names. One afternoon, as Chisom priced beans near Onitsha, two women from the next lane lowered their voices only after she came close enough to hear the end of the sentence. "So she is even trying to wear her friend's face to leave the country." The seller looked up, recognized Chisom, and suddenly became busy with the weighing scale. Nobody apologized. Nobody needed to. The knife had already gone in. By evening, the story reached the compound in a sharper form. Children repeated what they did not understand because adults had seasoned it first. Somto returned from football with dirt on his knees and a fight starting in the corners of his mouth. He muttered, "They said my sister is borrowing a life." At the borehole, the landlord's wife folded her arms beneath her breasts and looked from Chisom to her mother and back. Again, when one finger is dipped in palm oil, the others do not stay clean. It was an old saying, and in that moment it did not sound like wisdom. It sounded like a door closing. Chisom did not answer. She only took the bucket from her mother's hand before the older woman could speak and carried it to their room. The plastic handle cut a red line into her palm. Her silence stood in the room long after the water had settled. Adana noticed the silence and pressed harder. She came in the next day with a kind of brisk concern that made refusal look childish. She brought papers for final movement arrangement, tapped where signatures were needed, and explained everything at a speed designed to outrun caution. Chisom read what she could. Some lines were clear, others hid behind language made to be obeyed, not understood. "Why is your name here?" Chisom asked. "Because I am your sponsor contact on this side. Do you want to travel, or do you want to keep reading until the plane flies without you?" At that exact moment, the clinic matron called to say the surgeon would not hold Chisom's mother's date without an advance payment by noon next day. Chisom's thumb hovered over the line where she was meant to sign. Her breath shortened once, then steadied. Adana lowered her voice further. "Nobody will clap for your honesty if your mother misses treatment." Chisom signed. That single movement changed the way people around her stood. Women who used to hand her keys now tucked them deeper into their blouses. At the clinic, the matron stopped leaving cash with her to buy supplies. A churchwoman who had once praised her careful hands now looked over her shoulder when counting offering envelopes. Nothing dramatic happened. It was worse than that. Things simply shifted 1 inch away from trust. If there was one person in Brightway Travels who still looked at Chisom as if she were a human being standing inside a snare, it was Kene. He was Adana's cousin, the one who handled photocopies, scanned passports, and climbed a rickety stool to fix the router whenever it froze. He was not a man people noticed first. His shirts were always clean, but slightly faded at the collar, and his sandals had begun to tilt inward from long days of standing. He supported a younger sister in Polytechnic with most of what he earned, and because his late mother had been Adana's father's sister, family and employment sat on the same bench in his life. To cross one was to threaten both.
Kene saw more than people thought he did. He saw Adana open Chisom's email before forwarding nothing. He saw the black mark attached to Adana's profile in the back-end system they were not supposed to discuss. He saw the signed form that had not been explained properly. Twice he almost spoke and swallowed the words. The first time, Adana's uncle reminded him who paid his salary. The second time, he watched his sister's school fee reminder flash on his phone screen. What moved him in the end was small. Chisom came to the office one afternoon carrying her mother's test results in the same transparent folder as the travel papers. She did not realize one of the scan reports had slipped halfway out. Kene picked it up before it touched the floor. On the edge of the paper, beneath clinical terms he could not pronounce, he saw the amount required for surgery written in red pen. Chisom thanked him without really looking at him, already hurrying toward Adana's desk. That night, Kene did not sleep well. In the morning, he tore a corner of an old receipt, wrote 7 words on it, and waited until Chisom passed the office gate. Your own approval exists. Ask for file 17. He did not hand it to her openly. He tucked it beneath the transparent folder when Adana turned to answer a call. By the time Adana discovered what he had done, it was evening. She slapped the back of his neck hard enough to jolt his teeth and told him not to return to the office if he wanted to start siding with clients who think poverty makes them saints. Kene lost the job that day. He also lost his sleeping space at his uncle's flat by the weekend. Still, the warning reached Chisom too late, or perhaps just early enough to deepen her torment. She read the note behind the clinic building, near the line where washed bandages flapped like tired flags. Her first instinct was to confront Adana. Her second was to dismiss Kene as bitter. By then, the travel date was too close, the surgery payment too near, the gossip too wide. Need had begun speaking in her ear with the confidence of truth. Adana did what cruel people often do when their plan nears completion. She became gentler. She brought bread one evening. She paid for a bike ride to the lab. She spoke kindly to Chisom's mother. She even sat on the edge of the bed and held the older woman's feet while rubbing ointment into swollen ankles. If she had stopped there, if she had confessed with even half a heart, the story might have bent another way. She almost did. At Jibowo Motor Park in Lagos, with departure still hours away and buses coughing heat into the morning, Chisom stood beside her small suitcase wearing a plain cardigan over a blouse Adana had chosen. Her hair was tucked under the borrowed wig. In her hand was the passport carrying Adana's name. She did not open it often. Each time she did, she looked quickly and shut it again, like somebody touching a hot pot to prove it was still hot. Her mother had hugged her at dawn without words. Somto had tried to grin and failed. On the ride from Onitsha, Chisom had spent long stretches looking out the window at half-built houses and billboards for schools abroad, her lips moving now and then in prayer. At the park, she turned to Adana and said, "When I settle there, the first thing I will do is send for my mother's full treatment. The second is to return everything you have spent." The sentence landed badly because it was clean. Adana looked at her friend's face and saw not competition for the first time, but trust so complete it felt indecent to touch. For a moment, her hand moved toward her bag where the second phone lay, the one she intended to use for the anonymous call. She could still have said it then. She could still have admitted that her own profile was poisoned, that one sponsor abroad had reported her for collecting processing money and disappearing, that immigration had attached a watch alert to her name months earlier. She could still have pulled Chisom away before the airport lights made a spectacle of her. Then her creditor called. The man did not shout. That was the trouble. He merely asked when he should come for his money and whether he should speak to her father directly next time. Adana stared at the cracked cement beneath her sandal and felt the old panic rise like heat from a pot. She ended the call. She made another. At Murtala Muhammad Airport, the line moved in small, respectful shuffles. Chisom kept both hands on the suitcase handle. When her turn came, the immigration officer scanned the passport, glanced at the screen, then looked up at her face a second time. His expression did not change much, only the space around his eyes hardened. "Step aside." She obeyed. Another officer came, then another. Questions began with the name on the passport and widened from there. Did she know the owner? Why had this identity been linked to an earlier sponsorship complaint? Who gave her the document? Was she the same person who received funds from a recruiter in Birmingham 3 months ago under this name? Chisom answered as best she could, but the explanation coming out of her mouth sounded impossible even to her own ears. Each explanation made the next question colder. By the time they opened her suitcase under a strip of white light, other passengers had already started watching. Her mother's wrapper, folded carefully for the journey, was lifted and dropped aside. The tin of ground crayfish she was carrying for a churchwoman in London rolled against the table edge and stopped. A child in the queue stared openly. Chisom tried once to say Adana's name and felt her throat close around it. She was not jailed, not that day, but she was detained long enough to understand how quickly a person's body can stop feeling like her own. Statements were taken, calls were made. Someone somewhere confirmed that the passport owner had also lodged a complaint. That was Adana's masterpiece. She had phoned ahead, and then, while Chisom sat under fluorescent light answering questions, she sent messages back to Odoakpu saying her friend had stolen her identity in a desperate attempt to escape the country. By evening, when officers released Chisom pending further investigation and arranged for her to travel back with reporting instructions, the story had outrun the bus. The compound was full when she arrived. Children stopped mid-game. 2 women who had been sorting bitter leaf straightened and held the stems in their hands without moving. The landlord stood under the udala tree pretending not to have been waiting. Chisom stepped down from the vehicle carrying the small plastic bag given back to her at the airport. Her suitcase looked older than it had that morning. Adana was there before the vehicle door even shut properly. "She thought hunger gave her the right to wear my life," she said not loudly, but with the kind of precision that travels farther than shouting. "Now let everybody see where borrowed memes end." Chisom turned her head toward her once. That was all. She did not speak. One officer asked for directions to the local station. Another reminded her to report when called. Their presence alone was enough. The compound had seen uniforms at her side. In a place like that, people did not wait for full facts before deciding where to stand.
Inside her room, Chisom set the plastic bag on the floor and did not open it. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the borrowed wig until the pin at the back began to bite. When she finally removed it, she placed it beside the suitcase as if laying down evidence against herself. Her mother stood at the doorway for a long time, one hand pressed against the frame, then left because there are griefs a person cannot witness without interfering with their shape. The bulb hummed. Outside, voices rose and fell at the tap. Chisom sat alone in that small room with the silence of somebody hearing her own name from very far away. The next morning arrived the way painful mornings do, without apology. Chisom woke stiff, fully dressed, her neck bent at an angle that told the truth about how little she had slept. Sunlight found a tear in the curtain and laid a narrow stripe across the floor. The borrowed wig remained where she had dropped it, its parting neat, its lie intact. She stared at it until her eyes hurt. For a brief, dangerous moment, she considered burning every paper connected to the journey and letting shame do what it liked. If the compound had already judged, perhaps silence was the cheapest road left. Then she remembered a saying her father used when people refused counsel because they were in love with urgency. The fly that has no advisor follows the corpse into the grave. It was not a comforting memory, it was a sharp one. She sat up. What she had done wrong stood plainly enough before her. She had allowed desperation to push her into another person's shadow. But even error has a border, and somebody had led her beyond it on purpose. Chisom opened the plastic bag from the airport. Inside were photocopies, a temporary release slip, 2 transport receipts, and the crumpled note Kene had slipped into her folder days earlier. Your own approval exists. Ask for file 17. She read the sentence again and again until the ink began to look like thread. Then she washed her face, tied her scarf properly, and stepped outside. Her mother was sitting on the low stool with her hospital card in her lap. She looked up, ready to ask a question she probably had been shaping all night. Chisom spoke first. I will answer for what I agreed to, but I will not carry what I did not do. Her mother's fingers tightened around the card. She nodded once. By noon, Chisom had found Kene behind a locksmith's shop near Upper Iweka, loading cartons for daily pay. His cheek still showed the faint yellow-green shadow of where Adana's uncle had struck him after the dismissal. When he saw her, he removed his cap and held it in both hands. I should have spoken earlier, he said. Chisom did not tell him whether earlier would have saved her. Some truths arrived too late to be used as comfort. She only asked, "What is file 17?" Kene looked up and down the road before answering. Your real approval letter, payment record, email log. Adana hid it. There's more. If you want this thing to stop, it cannot remain inside whispers. The crowd that gathered 3 days later under the Udala tree came partly for justice and partly for spectacle. In compounds like that, those two things often arrived wearing the same cloth. The landlord called a meeting because the scandal was now affecting everybody. Tenants complained customers were avoiding them. The churchwomen wanted clarity before the next welfare collection. Adana agreed at once, too quickly, certain that public space would obey the story she had already planted. Plastic chairs formed a crooked circle. Men stood at the back with folded arms. Children were chased away and returned by the side path. Mama Ijeoma came with her walking stick and sat in the front, breathing hard but refusing help. The bread seller balanced her tray on a bench and stayed. Even the barber closed his kiosk halfway. Adana arrived in a fitted gown the color of ripe plum, with dark glasses pushed up on her head and a handbag tucked under her arm. She took her seat like somebody attending a ceremony in her honor. If there was fear in her, it sat deep enough not to show yet. Her father stood behind her, face drawn. He had been hearing fragments for days without understanding their full shape. The landlord cleared his throat and began the way men do when they wish to sound fair before the fair thing has been identified. He spoke of reputation, compound peace, the danger of travel shortcuts, and the need for truth. Then he invited Adana
to speak first, because in public matters, the person who grabs the floor early often hopes to shape the memory of it. Adana rose slowly, placed one palm on the back of her chair, and let her eyes move around the crowd before settling on Chisom. I took Adana like a sister. When she got this travel chance, I congratulated her. I even helped with paperwork because that is my line of work. But greed is a sickness. She began pressing me for access to my documents. I refused. Next thing, I was getting calls that my identity had been used at the airport. Me! She placed a hand against her chest. If I had not spoken up quickly, maybe I too would be in trouble today. There were murmurs. A few people nodded because they had already rehearsed agreement in private. Adana sensed it and stepped harder. I know poverty can disgrace a person's judgment, she said, her gaze still fixed on Chisom. But there must be limits. There must be ugwu, Dignity. If somebody is hungry, it does not mean she should wear another woman's face. That word ugu, dignity, had always been one Chisom's mother guarded like a locked box. Hearing it in Adana's mouth caused a visible flinch in the older woman's shoulders. Chisom remained seated. Her hands lay flat on her knees. She had chosen before coming that she would speak only when the ground beneath the story had been cut open, so she waited. Kene stepped into the circle before the landlord could invite the next elder. His shirt was missing a button. His sandals were dusty from walking. For a heartbeat, the crowd made the sound crowds make when something unexpected arrived, a brief intake, shared but uneven. Adana's face changed first at the eyes. "What is he doing here?" she asked. Kene did not look at her. He went straight to the landlord and held out a brown envelope thick enough to bend at the middle. "I worked at Brightway Travels. I processed these files. I am family to Adana. That is why I kept quiet too long. Today I am speaking because silence has done enough." Adana stood up so quickly her chair scraped. "He was dismissed for theft," she snapped. "Anything he says is revenge." Kene opened the envelope anyway. Papers slid into his hand, printouts, payment slips, email logs, photocopies of passport pages. He gave the first document to the landlord, the second to the catechist, the third to Mama Ijeoma, because old eyes sometimes deserve the honor of seeing the truth first. This is Chisom's genuine approval letter, issued before the fake travel movement. This is the email record showing it was opened on the system and not forwarded to her. This is the sponsor payment request made under Adana's name. This is the immigration watch note attached to that name because of an earlier complaint. And this, he held up his phone with a cracked screen, is Adana's voice. He pressed play.
Let her go with it. Once they stop her, I will say she stole my profile. The sponsor still owes balance. I cannot lose everything because one clinic girl thinks she deserves to fly before me. For a second, no one moved. Then several things happened at once. Adana lunged toward Kene with her handbag raised. Kene stepped back. The bag struck the edge of a chair, flew open, and emptied itself across the cement. Out spilled not powder or lipstick first, but passports, 3 of them. Then a stack of passport photographs held by rubber band. Then receipts with different women's names. Then, sliding last and face up for the whole circle to see, Chisom's actual passport and the printed embassy appointment letter Adana had sworn did not exist. The sight of those documents on the ground did what no speech could have done. It made the lie physical. Mama Ijeoma bent with difficulty, lifted Chisom's passport using both hands, and held it out as if presenting a child restored. The bread seller let out a low hiss through her teeth. The barber, who had joked 2 days earlier that some people were now renting identities like party clothes, removed his cap and stared at the floor. One of the women from the bean stall covered her mouth with her wrapper edge. Somto, standing near the back, took 1 step forward and then stopped because his sister had not moved. Adana dropped to her knees and began gathering the spilled passports with frantic fingers. They are client files. They are office materials. Kene planted, but the sentence could not finish. 2 plainclothes officers who had been waiting near the gate stepped into the circle. Kene had gone to the station that morning before coming to the meeting. One officer picked up the passports carefully. The other asked Adana for the second phone used to communicate with the sponsor. She denied having one. Her father stared at her as if he had never seen the shape of her face properly before. When the officer reached into the side pocket of the fallen handbag and brought out a small black phone wrapped in tissue, the old man took 1 backward step and sat down heavily on the bench behind him. The first officer asked Adana to stand. She did, but not with the composure she had worn into the compound. Her sandals slipped. 1 strap snapped against the buckle. She reached for her father. He did not raise his hand. She looked toward Chisom as though the old terms of friendship might still be negotiated in public if only she found the right expression. What showed on Chisom's face was not triumph, it was something quieter and harder to use, an exhausted clarity. "Tell them," Adana said suddenly, voice cracking now in earnest. "Tell them I did not mean all of it. I only wanted the money back. I only wanted a chance too." Kene's mouth tightened. There was pity in his eyes, but it arrived too late to save anyone. Chisom stood at last. The crowd leaned almost physically toward her. After days of insult, after the airport, after the uniforms at her door, everyone expected a public wound to be returned in equal measure. Instead, she asked the landlord for permission to speak and got it with a nod. "I agreed to a wrong thing because fear entered my judgment. That part is mine, and I will answer for it wherever I must. But this woman hid my real papers, used my need, and sent me into a trap she already knew was waiting. Let everybody here remember the difference." Nothing more. No shouting, no curse. Sometimes restraint humiliates more deeply than anger. Adana seemed to shrink under it. The officers led her toward the gate while neighbors parted to make a path. No one argued for her. No one called out the usual phrases about youth or second chances. Even those who loved her stood with the stiff helplessness of people learning that loyalty has a point beyond which it becomes participation. As she passed Mama Ijeoma, the old woman tapped her walking stick once against the ground and said, not loudly, "Names are not wrappers for ceremony." The compound held that sentence in silence after Adana was gone. In the weeks that followed, shame changed address. People who had avoided Chisom began returning in careful ways. The landlord's wife brought a bowl of soup and set it down without speech, as if apology could be smuggled inside scent. The matron at the clinic restored her duties one by one. Churchwomen stopped their whispers when she approached. One of the bean sellers from Ochancha came to say she had repeated what she had not confirmed and would carry that on her head for a while. Chisom listened to each of them with the same level face. She did not make forgiveness cheap, but she did not deny people the labor of trying. Kene found temporary work at a photocopy stall near the post office. It paid less than Brightway, but it was honest, and for the first time in weeks, he slept without waking to the memory of his own silence. On Saturdays, he began helping Chisom in the church hall, where she set up a small table and invited women preparing travel documents to bring any paper they did not understand before signing. The first week, only 3 came. By the 4th, the bench was full. Chisom would smooth each form flat with her palm, read the lines slowly, and circle the dangerous ones in red. Beside her sat a plastic tray of transparent folders, each labeled in neat capital letters with its owner's name. Months later, when the sponsor abroad finally agreed to reprocess her placement under her real identity after receiving the cleared reports, Chisom did not announce the date widely. She bought her mother a new wrapper from Ochancha, paid the remaining hospital bills, and gave Somto the sandals he had long stopped asking for. On the Sunday before departure, Mama Ijeoma held Chisom's hand outside church and said, "Truth is like palm oil. It will always rise to the top." At the departure gate, Chisom pressed her thumb once over her own name and walked through as the scanner flashed green. If this story stayed with you, tell me this in the comments. At what exact moment did Kene become the bravest person in the story for you? When he slipped the warning into Chisom's folder, when he lost his job, or when he stood before his own family and let the whole compound hear Adana's voice? And if you were Chisom, would you have answered Adana differently under that udala tree? If you felt the weight of this story, leave a like and subscribe. And stay close. There are more stories like